Hello from the World Economic Forum in Geneva, Switzerland. I'm Abhinav Chugh, and this is Our World in Transformation, a show where we break down the underlying forces shaping our world with leading experts. Today's episode focuses on ecopreneurs driving sustainable impact. Addressing the climate emergency requires reducing greenhouse gases emissions rapidly and drastically from every sector of the economy in order to protect our natural ecosystems. And for that, we need innovative solutions which are both nature-based, but also make the most out of the rapid technological developments of our world. We need an approach which uses nature's resources to protect and restore ecosystems while resolving societal challenges. And to achieve these solutions at scale, we need innovative leaders who embrace these solutions that restore our planetary life support systems. Our guests today are Arti Dhar, co-founder Farmers for Forests, and Matthias Charles Jabe, co-founder and CEO of AcoFresh. And to our viewers joining us online, if you would like to ask a question to Arti and Matthias, we will be taking questions via the Zoom Q&A feature in the second part of the episode. Welcome to the show, Arti and Matthias. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well,
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Welcome, Matthias. Let's start with, I'm sure our viewers tuning us in online are very curious to hear about the solutions that you've developed, which we're talking about today over the theme of the episode, solutions for sustainability. Could you share with us what your projects are about? Arti, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Abhinav. I'm very, very happy to be here. As you mentioned, I'm a co-founder of Farmers for Forests. We launched Farmers for Forests in 2019 with the mission to both protect and increase India's forest cover in very, very close collaboration with the farmers and indigenous communities. The focus of the organization is on biodiversity, so using both scientific and indigenous knowledge to grow forests where biodiversity is abundant, as well as on making sure that our work is sustainable in the long term. So trying to ensure right from the beginning that all the work and resources that we are putting into, say, growing new forests or protecting existing vulnerable forests sustain for a very long time and continue to provide ecosystem services that mature forests can only provide, like carbon sequestration, soil conservation, habitat for biodiversity, etc. I should also mention here that we do put a lot of time and effort to also measure the outcomes of our work. We monitor all our forests through a mix of satellite data, drone orthomosaics, simple mobile-based technologies, as well as good old people on the ground keeping tabs on the work we are doing.
Thank you, Arti. Matthias, over to you.
Yes, hi. I'm so excited to be here. And Arti, thanks so much for the incredible work you are doing. It's very inspiring. So at AcoFresh, what we do is that we are looking at reducing the issue of post-harvest losses in local communities. And the issue of food waste is something that is global. And at AcoFresh, we are trying to tackle post-harvest losses, which is also a major contributor of food waste. So what we are doing to reduce post-harvest losses in local communities is that we are offering a decentralized cold storage preservation technology that operates 100% on solar. And this technology preserves crops under environmentally controlled temperatures in order to help reduce post-harvest losses. And what we are doing is that farmers are being offered to use the technology as a service because we understand that these smallholder farmers wouldn't be able to purchase the entire technology upfront, neither do they have the technical expertise to manage it. And that has been the main reason why most of these farmers aren't able to cool their crops and end up losing majority of their crops, And it will surprise you to know that just in sub-Saharan Africa, farmers are losing up to 40% of all harvested produce between harvest and consumption. This makes the work we are doing quite critical to ensuring that we are trying to reduce food waste, ensuring that we are building resilient and stronger food systems in local communities. And one other important update about my work is that what we are also trying to do is to pilot the cold storage solution in the health sector as well as the fishing sector, because we realize that cold storage can play cold chain can play significant roles in the health sector as well by storing vaccines, and most of these communities are not having access to electricity. So once there's a cold storage technology that runs 100% on solar energy, we are able to preserve vaccines, to save millions of children who die from, vaccine preventable diseases across, small other farming communities as well.
Thank you, Matthias. Actually, I was just thinking about vaccine storage and supply as you were talking about your project as well. Well, we can talk about that more a bit later as well. But before that, Arti had a question for you. Your intervention is based on economic interests and development and progress of farmer communities and communities that support on accompanying communities around these areas as well. How are you seeing impact being delivered by your interventions for these farmers and these communities while also delivering on your mission and objective of ecosystem restoration?
Yes, that's a really good question. So when we started out, we knew that we would have to work at the intersection of nature and economics, because oftentimes the drivers of tree forestation for poor or rural communities tends to be just financial structures that are not correctly aligned. I can go into that a bit more in detail later, but essentially what we use is known as the Payment for Ecosystem Services, or PES model, to implement our land restoration and forest protection work. What does PES mean? It means that we provide financial support to communities that is conditional on them ensuring a minimum percentage of tree cover is maintained on their land. And that is both for forest protection and afforestation, tree forestation. So it's essentially, think of it as a results-based payment. With the rationale being that, if there is a social cost to every ton of carbon being emitted in the atmosphere, if there's an economic cost to it, shouldn't our markets then also sort of reward stewards and protectors and custodians of nature and financially compensate them for sequestering carbon from these natural resources on their land? So that was essentially the rationale. The PES model has allowed us to do a few things. Number one, right off the bat, it brings in accountability and the sense of investment from the communities to ensure that the trees and forests survive a long term, which is very important. It's only mature trees and not tree saplings that can provide environmental benefits like carbon sequestration, groundwater recharge, air filtration, etc. The results-based payment allows us to do that. So we've seen our tree survival rates be relatively high, around 90% at an average. The second thing the PES model has allowed us to do is focus on biodiversity, because it allows us to grow various tree species which are not necessarily commercially profitable like fruit trees, but are best suited for local ecology. Obviously communities are more concerned about short-term financial returns, as they should be, but our results-based payments to some degree addresses that. So we are able to grow even native thorny deciduous trees that don't have a harvest as such, but are ideal for some of the drought-prone arid regions that we work in. And this model then also allows us to develop a seed bank for tree species, which we see are slowly going locally extinct. The third point and last point I'll make is that we're also realizing that the forests that we are growing are not just a great climate change mitigation model, but also a great adaptation tool. As I mentioned, we work in a lot of drought-prone areas where rainfall has become erratic, groundwater is depleting. So it's very common to see abandoned farmland in these areas because just agriculture just becomes unviable. But trees are perennials, right? They survive. If they survive after the first couple of years, they will keep giving the farmers some sort of harvest, regardless of whatever extreme weather event they're dealing with. So that's another great sort of outcome that we are seeing through our work.
I'm curious to hear How do you build trust with these when working with these farmers? Because I mean, you're kind of, I mean, they have to kind of adopt this model. You have to build this trust. They have to adopt this whole model of conditional cash transfers as well. What does that process look like?
That's another great question. We decided very early on that we will practice what's known as radical collaboration. There are a lot of amazing local NGOs that don't necessarily work in nature-based solutions. They're either working in public health or rural livelihoods, skills, etc., but have already built local trust. We want to take advantage of that. So when we go into communities, we figure out ways to work together and further leverage on the trust that they've already built. The PES also solves for that to some extent, right? We want to we have very radical open conversations with these communities. We say we understand that the systems we've built don't necessarily incentivize you to protect nature on their land. A dead tree is more financially valuable than a tree that's alive. So we are upfront compensating you fairly for the work and the resources that you're putting in. So that helps a lot too. So it's generally a combination of these two things. We also generally, we have a sort of a parallel rural governance system in India. We work and talk to a lot of local leaders, explain to them the model. And it's generally the early adopters that's a bit of a challenge. Once we have the first couple of farmers and community land that we begin work with, then it's just sort of like a multiplier effect. Then they see that we are serious about the work we are doing. We care about the environment and the community. And then it's generally a matter of then trying to see who we can work with out of all the people that are ready to work with us.
Absolutely. It's not just a nature-based solution, but a community-based and a community-focused solution here as well for impact. Matthias, moving on to you, I find the solution that you developed so fascinating, and it always startles me when, this figure that 1/3 of the food that is produced in the world is lost before it even reaches the consumer, and we're living in a time where food insecurity and hunger and starvation is more pertinent than ever. What I would love to learn about the challenges you faced while scaling AquaFresh. What was the journey like when you were building the first off-grid cold storage?
Yeah, thanks so much. So the journey has been quite, hectic because it's quite difficult working with small-scale farmers, and it has also been a learning journey for myself and my team. So one of the major challenges we faced has to do with lack of electricity. And I spoke about this issue during the Global Solutions Summit this year in Berlin, about the fact that there are a lot of people who are still not having access to the grid. And it becomes difficult for us to deploy such technologies, in these areas. And because just in Ghana alone, you find that there are over 3 million people who are not having access to any form of electricity. So during our needs assessments, our community needs assessments, we realized that although we wanted to provide a solution that is cold storage solution to smallholder farmers, but then again, we realized that these farmers were not having any access to, the grid. And it was quite a challenge. So, that gave us more informed decisions to operate our technology 100% on solar. And it will also surprise you to know that we are transitioning even from using batteries to thermal energy to make sure that
we seem to have we lost Matthias midway. We'll try to get him back, but perhaps Arti, I could go back to you. I could have a long discussion about this as well because I'm quite interested in what you're doing as well. Essentially, what you're working with is solving the essential problem of land use, and that's being exacerbated, and there's more stress being put on land because of climate change, because there's this pressure on producing more food to feed the needs of a growing population. What has been the greatest climate impact? You mentioned drought. How has this affected the communities that you're working in, and what do you see the future looking like over there?
In many ways, farmers are sort of, in India at least, the first sort of real victims of climate change because it's devastating their livelihoods as we speak right now. So, that's what our effort is, to change sort of, quote unquote, the victims of climate change into climate stewards, and, make alternative food systems like food forests sort of, potential sources of both food as well as income for these communities, just because they are more climate change resilient. As I mentioned, we work in the western state of Maharashtra in India, which is particularly vulnerable to, extreme weather events, too much rainfall, no rainfall. Unfortunately, some areas we work in are also known as, sort of capitals of farmer suicides, just because of the devastation rising temperatures have caused. So, we see ourselves, we follow all regenerative permaculture, sustainable farming practices when we do our work. We grow only native trees. We try to minimize as much water input as possible. And yet it's very, very hard to do because there's no groundwater, because of both rising temperatures and unsustainable agriculture practices over the last couple of decades. So, there is a very sort of concerted push to, to produce food in a more sustainable way where you're not being extractive, as well as trying to maintain some amount of similar economic returns for these communities. And, that's something that we'll continue to try to do.
Thank you. Matthias, I see you're back, and you dropped off midway while talking about your journey. As you come back on telling us about your journey, I'm also curious if you could tell us about the impact that you've delivered with the communities that you've been working with your solution.
Yes, thanks so much. And so sorry, I lost power. And, I was talking about some of the challenges we encountered had to do with lack of electricity, and this should even tell us that we need to move to solar and renewable energy to make sure that it's more sustainable and we are always having access to constant power. But then let me quickly move into our impact. So at AcoFresh, since we started, we've been able to create jobs for up to 23 women in 2 local communities. We've also been able to reduce food waste carbon emissions, and just one storage technology is able to reduce up to 300 tons of CO2 emissions. And aside that, we are also helping improve livelihoods of smallholder farmers by improving their economic stability. Just last farming season, I'm proud to let you know that we were able to help farmers increase their total seasonal income by over 150%. Because one thing we realize in our pilots community is that when people come to buy crops from these farmers, they end up leveraging on perishability of crops, to give them prices at a very lower fee, which is really affecting the economic stability of farmers. But then after we had introduced our solution, we realized that the farmers were now able to, have the bargaining power, and they are able to accept crops at higher prices. And that really helped them increase their seasonal income by 150%. That was really, really tremendous for us within last farming season. And aside that, we are also offering farmer training services to smallholder farmers. And then we are teaching them how to, adapt to sustainable crop, production. We are also helping them with post-harvest management, because we realize that in as much as we are providing them access to cold storage, we are also trying to let the farmers understand the fact that they need to adapt to certain practices in order to help them also reduce their losses. And for instance, the kind of crates they have to use, adapting to sustainable crates, and also reducing most of the chemicals they use on their farms and all that. We offer training services to them. And just next month, we'll be offering another set of training services to up to 100 farmers in 2 local communities here in Ghana. So that has been a summary of some of the impact our solution has been able to make till date.
Matthias, does this also give the farmers more of a negotiating power with in terms of market demand with the middlemen and other buyers in the market, considering now that they're not too dependent on they have a longer kind of shelf life with their produce? How does that affect that dynamic as well?
Yes, exactly. So probably I may want to reiterate. So yes, of course, the solution is helping farmers receive the bargaining power, because initially, before our solution was introduced, farmers do not get the bargaining power. So what buyers do is that, and the middlemen, what they do is that they leverage on perishability of crops and offer farmers prices at a very lower cost, which doesn't really help the farmers. But since we introduced our solution, farmers are able to store their crops for up to 21 days instead of the usual 5-day period. So with this in mind, the farmers are now able to have the bargaining power and then accept prices at a very competitive, ranges instead of the usual lower cost that the farmers get. So that is how this solution is also helping the farmers. And this is really boosting their economic stability. And just last farming season, as I said earlier, we were able to increase the farmers' income by 150%.
Excellent, incredible. And you were both, of course, selected by the World Economic Forum's Uplink platform as top innovators for your solutions, and we clearly see why. I'm curious to hear from both of you, what has your journey been with Uplink so far? How have you benefited from it? Maybe perhaps Arti, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think, as I'd mentioned before, when we started Farmers for Forests, one thing we decided from the outset was to sort of proactively practice both radical sharing of all the challenges and learnings from the ground, as well as radically collaborate with other organizations for the sake of speed, scale, and sustainability, given that we don't have a lot of time left to make a dent in sort of stemming temperature rise, ecosystem degradation, mass extinction of species, what have you. And connected to that, I think we were worried that a lot of the work happening in conservation and restoration is a bit fragmented. So Uplink, definitely, the Uplink platform solves for that, right? It's a common platform that that immediately connects you to these other amazing similar-minded organizations. Interestingly, we are currently piloting a small program with another Uplink top innovator from India. We are basically using their product, which is a compostable nursery bag in our nurseries, because it solves for a problem that we have, which is to try to minimize the use of plastic in restoration activities. So, that's been a very, very cool organic sort of outcome that's come out of the Uplink platform. Uplink allows us to meet and interact with inspiring entrepreneurs from other parts of the world, like Matthias, who are solving challenges in other parts of the food system value chain, from different from us, but still a lot of overlap in what he's doing and what we are trying to do. And I think finally, one another really nice tangible outcome has been that it has brought us, Farmers for Forests, the attention of other individuals and communities who were focused on nature-based solutions but maybe had never heard of us. So there's been a lot of new connections and conversations happening on that front, as well, as far as funding these efforts is concerned. So, yeah.
Thank you, Arti. Matthias, over to you as well on this.
Yes, so I think Arti has really mentioned, most of my points, because Uplink is essentially has provided us with several benefits, and I wouldn't want to, reiterate what she said. But one major thing I also want to add is the fact that Uplink has also provided us an opportunity to make our work more visible, and my team and I, that is one thing that is also very important. Just about 2 weeks ago, our solution was broadcasted on World Economic Forum's platforms, reaching up to 30 million people, which was quite incredible, and that feature alone was quite exciting for us, because we had requests coming in from several countries, asking us to replicate our solutions in their communities and their countries. And it was really, really, really incredible. We also had our websites, we had visits from over 500 people. We had people subscribing to our newsletters, and it was really, really inspiring. So I think the Uplink platform, aside providing us with all the necessary connections, providing us with the unique platforms to collaborate, it's also a big platform for us to, share our work and make our work visible to, the whole world. And that has really been exciting for us.
Thank you. And before we run out of time, I have one last question personally. for the both of you as well here, and feel free to build on each other's points as well. But what is that one bottleneck that you're facing currently in the environment that you operate, which once you resolve, it could really take your ventures to the next level? Matthias, perhaps we'll start with you on this one first.
Yes, thanks so much. So one thing I want to talk about is the fact that there should be access to raw materials, especially solar equipment, because that has been one of the major challenges we've been facing, and because first of all, solar equipment is very expensive locally here in Ghana, and then you have to resort to importing most of these equipment from other countries like Europe or China. So that has been one of the major challenges. So if there could be like an avenue where the government or private sector could introduce a large manufacturer, a manufacturing plant for solar equipment, is really going to be a game changer for us, because our technology solely relies on solar energy and green energy. So that is one thing. If we're able to get access to a good solar equipment manufacturing plant here in Ghana at an affordable cost, it will really help us, and it will be a game changer, because we are looking forward to scaling our solution beyond Ghana, because we've received requests coming from Zambia, and then we are really looking forward to piloting our solution there as well. So I think that has been one of the major challenges we've had so far.
Thank you, Matthias. Arti.
Before I answer the question about bottleneck, I just want to echo Matthias' point about replicability of our model. When we hear other organizations wanting to sort of try or test out our model in other parts of the world, we are very, very excited. More people in the mix, the better, the faster we can make an impact. In terms of bottleneck, I think one thing we want to be or do better at is we've been able to scale up our restoration, which is afforestation, reforestation work, quite rapidly, even though that's more capital intensive, just because it's easier to do, it's less complicated, land tenure systems when you're working with individual farmers or individual households or on sort of clear community lands. Where we are struggling a bit and want to do better is the forest protection bit. We have currently almost 3,000 acres of vulnerable forests under our forest protection program, but we are still dealing with as is with nearly all other countries, very complex laws around forests and land. And it's also harder to prove additionality as far as forest protection is concerned, right? When you're growing trees, you're planting trees, it's easy to see. You can see the difference, you can measure it. Harder to measure additionality as far as forest protection is concerned. And we would argue that that's a great return on investment, because it's hard to try to replicate and grow sort of the old growth natural forest that you find, right? It takes a long time to do that. So there's a lot of value in protecting existing forests. But it's very, very hard to do. It's hard to sort of circumvent the complex laws. It's hard to get funding for it. So we hope to scale that part a little bit more. We are in conversations with different government entities as well as different funding organizations to try to do that. And we hope to be able to do that much better from this year, because we think that that's of much greater value than even some of the restoration work.
Thank you. And what matters most over here is also your constant drive for the both of you and motivation to address these bottlenecks and challenges, to take your solutions to the next level, and I wish you both the best for that. Thank you so much for coming on to the show today. That's all we have time for today. It was a pleasure to have this discussion with the both of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
And to all of viewers joining online, to gain more insights and analysis on entrepreneurship, food security, biodiversity, and sustainable development, explore the World Economic Forum's Strategic Intelligence platform. And if you have a solution geared towards sustainable impact, please jump onto the forum's uplink platform. The opportunities are endless. This is our World in Transformation. See you next time.